All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the only coast-to-coast radio show that's all about the information economy. It's time for Inside Analysis. Yours truly, Eric Kavanagh, here in San Diego, beautiful San Diego at the TDWI conference, place where I used to work 20 years ago, helping them launch their webinar program in a past life. And folks, I'm so excited to be here on the exhibit floor. Obviously, lots of cool things happening here, talking about data. We're going to talk about repatriation today. We're going to talk about modernizing data warehouses. And I've got Curtis Bennett with me from OpenText. Curtis, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So I've known OpenText for a long time. I've been in this space longer than I care to remember. Repatriation strikes me as a very, very interesting topic because we saw this whole movement to the cloud.
Yeah.
And I personally, I was surprised. I thought it would be in the early 2000s and the early aughts that we get this movement to the cloud. It really wasn't till like 2011, 2012.
Right.
And I think Satya Nadella had something to do with that by pivoting Microsoft to the cloud. And then all these companies around the world were like, wow, I guess we got to go to the cloud.
Right.
And it began this whole movement, which has been massive. I mean, all the APIs, like it's just it's a massive disruption with a lot of good stuff coming out of that. But now some people are figuring out, hey, you know what, for certain workloads, for certain use cases, on-prem is better than the cloud.
Yeah.
So what do you guys see happening?
I mean, you're absolutely right. You know, I think in the early days, there was a lot of pushback, a lot of resistance to it simply because of the security concerns that people had. I mean, I had multiple conversations with CIOs that were like, how did one guy phrase it? You know, what comes from the cloud, rain, and I don't know. He had this whole analogy, but his concerns were security based, which I think were reasonable.
Right.
And at some point, you're right. In the last 10 years, something sort of shifted. I find that IT industry itself is very bandwagon driven, and you're right. Like something happens, some sort of thing happens where every company feels like they have to jump on that ship,
Right.
and suddenly everyone went into the cloud. They had to go to the cloud, or else they were going to get left behind.
Right.
I mean, I've had many conversations like that. Like, oh my God, like some of them didn't even know what it was,
Right.
but they're like, I've got to be there, otherwise we're going to be, we're going to be dust. And so, but now I think a lot of companies, at least the large enterprise companies, have they're sort of tired of these massive bills,
Right.
the uncontrolled spend, the spending that's sort of unpredictable,
Right.
and they're like, maybe this isn't the best way. I think the point of it is that if you've got a large monolithic application like a data warehouse, or we're at TDWI, so that's relevant. So if you've got this large, massive monolithic data warehouse application running in the cloud that you're spending money on 24/7, that doesn't really grow or shrink, which is kind of what cloud is good at.
Right.
Then maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense to just keep paying for that over and over and over again. So we've had clients. I mean, I can give you an example of Domo. Domo is a SaaS BI tool
I know them very well.
that was all in on the cloud. Their whole identity was cloud based, and so they've used our product, OpenText Analytics Database, formerly known as Vertica, for many years, and I've supported them from a Vertica standpoint for many years. And they finally left the cloud for cost reasons, but they immediately saw like a 20% uplift in performance across the board as well.
No kidding.
So, companies are, I think they're primarily motivated by cost, but they also see the performance gains as well.
Right.
Because the point is, Eric, is that the hardware that you buy today is not the same hardware that you might have bought 10 years ago.
Right.
It's really beefy. It's really strong. People are finding that you can get on-premise object storage layers as well. So there's a lot that you can do architecturally, from a hardware perspective, that you couldn't maybe do as easily like 10 years ago.
Right. Well, what's interesting too, I'll give you a bit of history. When I worked at TDWI back in 2005, I interviewed a gentleman as I was sort of starting this podcasting career 20 years ago. I interviewed a guy named Dr. Michael Stonebrigg.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Who I'm sure you're aware of.
Absolutely, yeah.
And he was actually pushing Vertica.
Yeah.
And he had this whole mantra of one size does not fit all.
Right.
And he made these really interesting points to me. And I didn't know who the guy was at the time. So I found out later from Philip Russell, was like, oh, wow, you interviewed Stonebrigg.
Big deal.
Yeah, he's a big deal, a godfather of the modern database.
Right.
And he had this really interesting point. He
and
said,
the founder of Vertica as well.
Right, Vertica and Tamer and like he's got a few of them out there.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
But he made this really interesting point. He said, for some reason, the relational database won the battle.
Yeah.
And everyone was using relational for everything.
Right.
And his point was, look, that doesn't make sense. He said there are certain use cases for which a relational database is excellent.
Right.
And there's certain where you want column orientation.
Right.
Because columns compress easily because they have all the same kind of information. And so his point was, look, there are other database types which are more valuable in certain use cases.
Yeah.
And goodness gracious, since then, look at the explosion we've had in database
Oh,
technologies.
yeah.
Right? I've got a theory that many of the open source tools sprang out of a desire to not have to pay Oracle.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, we've had many conversations with Oracle customers that would love to get off of that platform, but they're so baked into it
Right.
that it's really, really difficult to do
Right.
that. So, yeah, I mean, in talking about scale and stuff, I mean, our largest customer is in the ad tech space. They have, this is going to sound nuts. They have over 45 petabytes of data in Vertica
Wow.
that they run SQL queries against,
Wow.
which is insane even to me. And I live in the big data space. So yeah, and they have 100 petabytes, sorry, of data in their external data storage that they would love to be able to get sort of ad hoc access to as well from
I
like a
see.
data lake perspective, which we're, helping them do that too. So they've got a huge amount of data sort of sitting out there, but that they run SQL queries against that. It's just kind of,
Wow.
kind of insane to me. Yeah.
That is, well, ad tech is such a competitive space, and you need so much data to understand what's happening out there.
Right.
And there's so many things that can be tracked. And I think you're bringing up an interesting point here, which is that time-tested technologies that get the job done should be allowed to do the job.
Right.
There's always a
Right.
tendency to want to use the latest tools, the latest techniques, but so a friend of mine, Mark Madsen, is at this show, and he's taught me half of what I know about database. And he made an interesting comment years ago. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. He said, for a new database that you design, it'll take you 10 years to find the edge case that will crash it.
Okay.
I thought that was
That
fascinating.
seems reasonable. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So his point in this context
That
is
breaks the data model or something.
it breaks
like
the
that.
data
Yeah.
model,
Right.
something just doesn't function, it crashes and burns, and
Right.
you've got a
Yeah.
problem on your hands.
Right.
And so in certain cases, if something is doing the job efficiently, let it do the job.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I made a prediction just recently that I said, I guarantee you that 100 years from now, maybe not people, but at least machines will still be writing SQL queries against their database. Right? I mean, they're that ubiquitous, they're that ever present. I mean, they're just that good at what they do.
Right.
That I can't see that getting supplanted anytime really very soon. I
Right.
mean, certainly not in my career's lifetime
Right.
or even yours. So I think they're going to be here for a long time.
Well, and I remember, I'm sure you do too, the whole Hadoop era, where
Right.
everyone started talking about
Right.
NoSQL.
Right.
And then you know what happened about 2 or 3 years later is all of a sudden they said SQL on Hadoop, right?
Yeah.
So guess what? SQL isn't going away. To your point, it is a standard. It's an accepted standard.
Right.
People know SQL.
And I'm glad you brought up Hadoop because it gets back to that bandwagon concept I mentioned earlier. It's like
Right.
Hadoop was a great example of that, where everyone, oh my God, had to be on Hadoop. I
Right.
mean, I lived on it from the vendor side, where vendors or our customers just like, oh my God, if we're not on Hadoop, we're gonna lose this race or whatever.
Right.
But the fortunate thing, I guess, for customers that were wrangling with that was Hadoop was super complicated and you couldn't
Right.
find people to do it. So a
That's
lot of
right.
companies simply didn't do it because they didn't have the manpower, the skills to be able to do that. So
Right.
that was the only sort of saving grace with Hadoop. But now, it was cloud, it was Hadoop. To some extent, it's Snowflake, right? Everyone's got to be there. It's data lakes to some extent right now. I mean,
Right.
every conversation I have is somewhere related to a data lake. But
Right.
again, I'm kind of with you. I'm like, at the end of the day, why would you want to take everything in your monolithic legacy,
Right.
Teradata, Oracle, whatever it is,
Right.
that you're getting sub-second response time off,
Right.
shove it into an iceberg table, and now your queries are taking a minute long. Like, why would you want to do that?
Right.
When a database is just going to get the job done so much faster.
Right.
It's
Well, and so that brings up an excellent point, and that's why you're seeing this repatriation is that companies have learned the hard way. I
right.
mean, I remember it was probably like 6 or 7 years ago, a consultant on the show made this joke. He said what did he say? The most unpredictable line item on your expense report is AWS.
Yeah.
Because it would just blow up.
That's
Like
100%,
you get a long running query or something. Someone
Right.
forgot to turn something off. They went home for the weekend. You
Yeah.
get home, you got a $50,000 bill.
Everybody has
You're like,
stories
"What?"
like that.
Like,
I
it's
mean, even
terrifying.
we have stories like that because we do our internal testing on AWS, whatever.
Right.
Like, oh God, we
Right.
got to turn it off and we get chewed out for it. Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, it's so easy to do.
On-prem, you control the environment
Yeah.
and it's all there. I
Yeah.
actually have another client who taught me something that absolutely blew my mind. He was saying that it's a company called Hammerspace, and they have essentially done unstructured data orchestration at scale. So they've solved for hybrid cloud. And what he said was, I was kind of trashing SharePoint, and he said it's not a complete file system. He said for Dropbox, it's not a complete file system. So a POSIX compliant file system. That's a complete file system. He made this comment to me that is still blowing my mind. He said, you know, if we had this 15 years ago, you wouldn't have had to re-architect everything for the cloud because it's all because you had to go through these APIs to get
Right.
up into the cloud. And guess what? Every API is like a little toll booth,
Yeah.
right? It
Yeah.
costs money. It takes time.
Right. Right.
So his point is that, look, if you can do things on-prem and they're solving the business needs and you've got the speed you need, you don't have to go to the cloud,
Right.
right?
Yeah. No, I think S3 basically killed Hadoop. Right? That's
It did.
my
I
argument.
remember this. Yes.
S3 basically killed it. And so like people suddenly had that infinite file storage that they needed for all their,
Right.
you know, dark data. I'm sure you
Right.
remember that term. And that's what S3 does. And so that sort of led the way and paved the path for things like Databricks to
Wow.
chew out that data lake landscape, right? I mean, it's crazy how everything sort of comes around. And so, so Hadoop didn't fail necessarily.
Right.
It did sort of create, you know, object store. And of course, Vertica runs on object storage as well. So
Right.
it's a great platform to be able to give you that sort of infinite size. And,
Right.
it's scalable, and there's a lot of other benefits that come with it.
Well, and we learned a lot over the years about distributed systems and running federated environments and building clusters and understanding all that stuff.
Yeah.
It was a learning journey. And now, of course, the whole movement is toward data warehouse modernization.
Yeah.
And how do you jazz up your warehouse environment to be able to do new things? What are you guys doing in that space?
I mean, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, again, this conversation gets back to things like data lakes. I mean, I think a lot of our clients are sort of looking at, you know, is their solution the right solution? And is their scale going to be able to reach, you know, what they need to do? A lot of clients that we have conversations with, you know, they're on legacy platforms that maybe can't, you know, go past a certain number of terabytes. And
Right.
companies have grown, and especially companies that are really data focused, right? Our best clients are the ones that get the value of data, get, you know, the impact of data. They want to keep all of it. Whenever I have a conversation with a customer, they're like, well, we just don't have enough data. No, no, no. What you just told me is that you don't value data and you're not tracking it, right? Because the
That's
fact
good. I
is,
got to write that down.
any website could track big data. I mean, like if you're really interested in tracking data, then you could do that,
Right. That's
So,
very interesting.
so I think for our clients, a lot of it's just, you know, it's the same old problems, right? We've got too many systems; they're too siloed. You know, we want to be able to consolidate it all, and all these are, you know, really interesting challenges. I had a conversation once with the vice president of, I think it was Providence Health, but she said we have 17 oncology databases
Wow.
that they had all acquired from mergers and acquisitions.
Wow.
And she's like, that's just for oncology, right? And I said, that's I used to have a coworker that said, I used to have a phrase, that's a problem worth admiring. And see, I'm like, that's a problem worth admiring, you know. And I said, you know, in the real world, what you would do is you would hire a bunch of like maybe ETL specialists. You'd have an enterprise data modeler. You'd create a consistent model. You'd go through and you'd run all this ETL. You'd bridge them all to one side. But I said, the problem with that is that by the time we were done with that, we'd all be retired, right? I'll tell you a very interesting story at Uber. So Uber was a user of Vertica. They switched to something freeware, I think, open source. But they use our geospatial tools heavily to do all the ride sharing.
Oh, right, sure.
But we had a very interesting problem there where it was essentially a data model issue where they had like a one-to-many relationship between a ride and like a promotion. Like most rides don't have a promotion code, but the way they built it was like a one-to-one relationship.
I see.
And so it ended up creating a big sort of internal problem where they had like too many joins. It's complicated to explain, but that's essentially the short version. And so we ended up having a conversation with them about, well, why did you design it this way? And they said, well, you know, it's just, they move so fast, you know, in that space, and that sort of the Silicon Valley, heart of Silicon Valley, you know, they're just like, design it, move on to the next problem. So, you know, because in the real world, you wouldn't design something that sort of silly, like you wouldn't have a one-to-one relationship from something like a ride and a promotion, when most rides don't have promotions.
Right.
And so that led to this whole conversation. They said, you know, we could go and hire the best enterprise data architect we could find. They said, I don't know who he would even interview or what he would even do exactly, but they said the problem is that by the time he got done designing a system, it would all be completely different.
Right.
Right. So that just speaks to the difference between a company like Uber in Silicon Valley versus like a Bank of America on the East Coast that's like monolithic, that's slow moving. So there's huge differences in culture between these companies. So I find that stuff to be quite fascinating. But yeah, they had real problems with like the speed of which, I'll tell you this story. Their BI tool, and I hope for their sake it's different now, right? This was several years ago. Their BI tool was literally a web page with a text box on it, and a submit button.
Oh, gee.
And they would write SQL code into the text box and hit submit, and they would get it. That was their actual BI.
That's their BI.
That's what you do when you work in Silicon Valley and you're trying to like just get up to speed quickly and just solve a problem and move on to the next problem. Yeah.
That's wild.
That's wild, right?
Well, and you make a really interesting point, which is around solution design and information architecture. And
Right.
this actually allows us to weave in all these topics we're talking about. You know, we're talking about repatriating data. We're talking about data modernization. Data sovereignty is a huge issue these days because
Right.
of regulations and laws.
GDPR.
GDPR, of course, which is a straw in the wind. I mean,
Right.
even though it only technically refers to Europeans, still,
Mhm.
I've seen from most corporations, they've accepted it as a de facto
It
standard.
drives a lot of decisions here as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And that's an architectural decision you have to be careful about. And guess what? If you're on-prem, you're more in control of your data than if it's in the cloud.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, if you look at every major security breach in the last 5 years, AT&T, Santander Bank, the recent one was like Pearson, UK Pearson Education Company.
Right.
I think Verizon had one. Yeah, every one of them were cloud related,
Right.
right? And it's not because the cloud isn't secure, it's because people don't know what they're doing. Or companies, this is one of the challenges I've read about is that companies can't find good cloud people that have
Wow.
the skills to be able to create these
Wow.
permissions, these roles. In some cases, like there was a Snowflake access key left in like a GitHub account that hackers found and then used it to exploit. You know, but again, you know, if the thing about it is if you move on premise, one of the ironic things is that you'll never know which security breaches you prevented
Yeah.
by having your access not be living on the cloud
Right.
somewhere. So
Right.
that's one of the sort of side benefits.
Right.
I mean, people go into it with like, we can be this, we can do this for security reasons, but it's hard to know
Right.
what never happened.
Right.
Right. So that's
Right,
one
right,
of
right.
the
You
ironic
can't
things.
prove a negative, right?
Right.
It's kind of the deal,
That's
but
exactly
you
right.
can look at patterns and you can look at number of breaches based on, you know, on-prem environments versus cloud environments. I guess as we wrap up our segment here, the bottom line is that it's my old business partner and co-host used to say, horses for courses. Like in the racing world, like some horses are good at this kind of course, some are good at that kind of course, and you really have to understand what is right for your organization. And that's a solution architecture.
Yeah.
Well, folks, look this gentleman up online. He's got some great stories. Curtis Bennett from OpenText, which now has Vertica and its stack. What's it called now?
It's the worst name ever. OpenText Analytics Database, which
OpenText Analytics
I'm
Database.
not gonna argue it, but yeah, that's the name of it.
That's all right. Well, thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
All right, folks, we'll be right back. All right, folks, back here at TDWI Inside Analysis. Yours truly, Eric Kavanagh. Next up, I've got Nate Castillo from HPE. He's a good California boy these days. Drove down here from Orange County. And we're going to talk about some of the same topics as our first guest. We're going to talk about sovereignty, data sovereignty. This is a very hot topic. But maybe the AI infrastructure side is a good place to start because, Nate, a lot of folks, let's face it, there's tremendous pressure to get value from AI. In boardrooms everywhere, they're talking about it. Okay, what do we have to do? How are we going to make this happen? The AI infrastructure component can be very dicey and very complex, and it can wind up being very expensive. And frankly, a lot of the hiccups that come along happen because the infrastructure isn't set up properly. So maybe tell us a bit about what you folks do and how you operate in that world.
Yeah, Eric, so great to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity. But yeah, the way we approach it at HPE is what is the outcome that the business is trying to achieve with the customer, and then reverse engineer before we get the technology implemented, right? And so really anchoring in where the customer's trying to be, and often they don't, with AI, know exactly where they want to end up. So we have to work with them and do some consulting and proof of value up front to help them, inform their strategy. So it is a difficult, challenge. I think the failure rate for most AI projects right now is 95%, according to an MIT study. So, definitely spending the time to think through what is the outcome, but also where is this workload going to live best and deliver the most value for my business. So that's the question that I answered, rather than what's your personal preference about, the cloud wars. Let's recognize that each place you can run AI, public, private, or hybrid, there's a different set of trade-offs that you're making, right? So having that kind of value framework, luckily just did a session on it this morning where I presented a simple matrix to do that, but there's definitely, a bunch of people looking to get more value out of their workloads once they get them in production. So.
Well, and I really like that you focus on the outcomes first, because that is the business value. The business value comes from achieving some particular outcome. So what are you trying to do? Obvious use cases from over the years: reduce churn, improve traction, improve profitability. But these days, with the power of AI, there are lots of very interesting things you can do. Dynamic customer segmentation, hyper-personalization. And I can tell you, I've been in the marketing world for tech for a long time. I'm afraid to admit how long. Long time. I've been doing email marketing for 25 years, right? That's like 3 times longer than the average veteran in the space, right? So I've seen these patterns, and usage, like behavioral patterns, are changing. People are acting differently. That was one of the big stories out of COVID, was that all this consumer behavior just went sideways. And so all these models that were built to capitalize on the old world went out the window. So in that case, you've got to be able to ramp up quickly. You've got to be able to either build a new model or access a new model, bring a different business case, and ideally you want that to be not a terribly long period of time. Right, like from ideation, from recognition that there's a problem, to determination of what to do about it, to actually putting something in production. You want that in like weeks or a few months, and not much longer, right?
Right, and that's where a lot of people, there's a little bit of a misnomer in either building your own data center or maybe taking a traditional IT approach is what someone coined it. But now where a lot of the manufacturers and OEMs have gotten with NVIDIA's made turnkey systems so that you're getting a faster time to value by pre-integrating a lot of the software tools up front out of the factory, so that the data engineering folks and the software engineers don't need to spend time in the lower level engineering with IT. They can have it all ready to consume at scale. And I think you kind of hit on a couple points on where the consumer is at with AI, and I think where enterprises are at. They're focused on data sovereignty and governance, and how do we manage AI within a framework that is going to protect, our brand, that is going to protect our users, protect, our company and our internal employees. And so, being able to do that with HPE has gotten a lot easier. It always hasn't been as easy in the past, just as a wide observation of the industry. But the tools have come a long way, and now I'm kind of seeing a little bit of a shift where people are, maybe experimenting with AI in the cloud, in AWS, and then as they look to, mature and get more predictability around their economics, or they have a compliance issue that they're trying to address, they look to, us to bring it on, help them bring it on-prem.
Well, so you've made two really good points there. One is that experimentation is the key with AI going forward. You must play with this stuff. You must play around with it to understand what it can do, what it can't do. It's like a new set of skis, especially if you haven't skied before. Like, you have to play around with this to kind of understand the contours. And you also hinted at protection, like sovereignty, right? You look at GDPR, which is just a straw in the wind. I mean, here in the States, technically, unless you're in California or one of these other states, GDPR doesn't technically apply to you, but most corporate boards and organizations I've come across kind of pretend that it does, basically. So sovereignty really means something these days, and you guys have a story there too, right?
Yeah, so data sovereignty can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but from our standpoint, data processing regulations and some of these things that are driving enterprises to consider where they're running their workloads, how they're running them, and do we have full observability and auditability of who has access to those data sets, are absolutely important in enforcing the policies that these executives or boards will formulate those policies, right? So, and being able to enforce them and get observability and auditability is something that private cloud is known for, and having full observability over it. So GDPR or certain financial laws require data localization. So rather than moving that data into the cloud where a lot of the modeling capabilities might be for some organizations, we're talking about bringing the model down to the data so that they can do the inference in region. And there's still some regulations that I think will come to make that more of a logical design approach.
Well, and that's why you have to have a sort of layered approach to dealing with this, because your policies are designed to protect data, to treat it in a certain fashion, and you want to give yourself the agility to change your mind about where you're doing things. So that requires just some thoughtfulness. But I'm hearing this story now from more than a few companies of repatriation.
Yes.
Companies have gone into the cloud because it was, the bandwagon storyline. We got to get into the cloud. Everyone's in the cloud. The power's in the cloud. ELT because we have the cloud. But guess what? There are lots of costs. You're not really in control of that environment. I mean, that's one of the big issues. Whereas on-prem, you're in control. And so you figure PII, you figure also IP, intellectual property. If you really want to protect something, you want it in your environment, right?
That's exactly right. So like code generation is a really big use case in AI, lots of success. But do you want those tools that are off the shelf in a SaaS environment having access to your crown jewels in your source code? Not necessarily. So that's where customers have worked with us to develop their own open source tools and customize them to their fit, so that way they can leverage these capabilities and still protect the key assets for the company.
Right. Well, and if you do it strategically and you really think through the solution, and like you suggested, start with the business outcome in mind, you can design systems that don't break the bank. I mean, especially if you're on-prem, right? Because when you're in the cloud, there are hidden costs. I was reading an article just the other day about a lady saying, hey, a lot of these companies are building their whole new empires on APIs that are being run by these big companies that are burning through billions of dollars.
Right.
And so what happens when that domino falls?
Yeah.
Or this domino falls? And so these are risk mitigation strategies, right?
Totally. And the variable cost structure, there's some benefits, like you mentioned earlier, being able to experiment quickly. But as soon as you start to scale and you have more predictable economics in mind, you need to bring that on-prem, because you can't get a better economic profile long-term than anywhere else. So owning that asset, and then being able to tune the performance, so you're still getting, great performance is key. And at the end of the day, it's got to be valuable to the company, right? So if we're running a workload that doesn't need to be run on a rented Lamborghini in the cloud, right? Maybe it's better run, on a Model 3 or a Model Y, where you're doing your inference on the edge.
Right.
So recognizing based on workload, and there's a set of questions, that we go through at HPE to kind of identify what is the best case for our customers.
Right.
And so that's the approach that I think has been successful for us.
Well, and I found myself quoting Mark Twain, or paraphrasing him, when I say that the rumors of the clouds, the rumors of on-prem's demise have been greatly exaggerated. Right? Well, you have all these costs that are already sunk costs. You're amortizing these in this environment, and the fact is there are new technologies coming along to virtualize all that. There are companies coming along to find ways, and I'm sure HP is in this game, to allow you to optimize your on-prem environment to do these workloads in an area that you control, that you manage. And guess what? The last gentleman I interviewed was saying that a lot of the biggest breaches in the last 5 years have been in the cloud. Yeah. So for a while, it's like, no, it's more secure in the cloud. No, it's more secure on-prem. No, it's more secure in the cloud. And it changes, right? These dynamics change, but the bottom line is on-prem, you have control of your environment.
You have full control and full visibility. With that comes great responsibility.
Right.
But it's a different set of trade-offs you're making than a shared responsibility model, as you mentioned, in the cloud. And so variable costs compared to having predictable long-term, capital expenditures.
Right.
Or even with GreenLake now at HPE, we operationalize those costs.
Oh, wow.
And you can still amortize, a lot of your assets.
Really? Tell me about that.
Yeah.
So explain that.
Yeah, so we do 3 or 5 year contracts typically with GreenLake.
Okay.
And so we help manage the environment in a colo, depending on the service level the customer wants to have. Right? So we can tailor it to their approach, but ultimately we're getting involved in a long-term partnership over multiple years where we help them amortize those costs.
That's very clever. I mean, it takes a fintech approach, right? Like you're focusing on the FinOps basically, and saying, hey, this really matters. Let's make sure that
we have a whole range of tools now, like cloud workload optimizers to take and query some of these workloads that they have and help identify what would be opportunities for migration where it can make sense.
That's very clever. I mean, I like that you brought in the financial side, because this stuff costs money. And it can cost a lot of money if you're not careful about the architecture, right?
Right. And I've seen it go the other way, where you might overbuy some hardware and you're underutilizing it, but most often than not, the biggest culprit of sunk cost in IT is idle workloads in the cloud.
Right.
Engineers are great at spinning things up, not so great at turning them off. And so having some FinOps, tools to help
Right.
is one, but how do you do that in a hybrid construct where you have some on-prem and in the public cloud? So luckily HP with OpsRamp and some of the things we have some of those tools ready to go.
That's very clever. I can tell you guys have thought that through. And maybe we've got about 3 minutes left in this segment. I think one of the real keys going forward, you already mentioned experimentation, and the other is really agility. You need to have an environment that will allow you to capitalize on the new models that come along, on the new technologies that come along, whether that's ChatGPT or whether that's one of the small language models. I think are not getting enough attention.
Right.
I think small language models, I actually wrote about this a while ago. I'd be curious to get your opinion on this. I had this thought about a year and a half ago, it would be great to have what I call the executive cockpit, where what you do is you build a small language model in your data center, you train it on every piece of data you can find, your log files, your historical data, customer data, product data, whatever it is that you have access to, train it, and then you set up Kafka topics or streams into a vector database. And then guess what? The executives can sit there and ask any question all day long of what's happening in their business, and you can see everywhere. So think about how that changes management style. Because before, the CEO is waiting for everyone to come in and report what's happening. Not anymore. I know what's happening.
Right.
So let's talk about why it's happening. Let's talk about how to change things. Now you have much more productive conversations instead of perhaps bickering about whose number is right or whether this is accurate or not. That's not productive.
Yeah.
You want to have meaningful conversations. I know some companies are doing similar things to that, but I think that's the future of management and decision making. What do you think?
Yeah, I think AI has definitely transformed two buckets. One is knowledge worker productivity, so enhancing those workflows, removing tedious kind of data work from users, which has been awesome for many. But the other part is augmenting decision making, right? And so leveraging AI, whether it's in some of these tools that you create yourself or dashboards or however the exec team wants to consume, it's good, important to have flexibility, but full control over those underlying data, assets. So that way, no matter what you end up doing or showing, you have some role-based access controls, there's some governance around it, right? And so at the end of the day, decision-making, is something that I think can be more and more outsourced with AI.
Interesting.
But there's always going to be some human in the loop, at least with the current set of models and natural language processing.
And I think that should hopefully always be the case because humans, we kind of take for granted how much context we walk around with in our heads all the time. And that's one of the challenges with these models is context management and context windows, and they'll go sideways when they reach the limit of that, right? And then it's you don't want that stuff to go sideways, especially not customer facing, right? As long as it's internally facing, that's okay because a human can still make the decision, but you got to be careful. Well, folks, look this gentleman up online, Nate Castillo from HPE, is an expert, of course, in all things data, and we're in a brave new world, folks. And stand by, we'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here at TDWI in San Diego, part of Inside Analysis, and yours truly is next up, interviewing Tim Alexander from Yellowbrick Data. Follow the Yellow Brick Road, baby. And they were a hardware company. I came across you guys, 6, 7, 8 years ago, maybe? It was a while ago in New York, and I saw the hardware. I'm like, oh, okay, another hardware data warehouse appliance. And then, of course, you pivoted a little bit. But I want to talk about a couple of interesting topics here. One is large language models and SQL warehouses. Now you have all this sort of agentic stuff. You have people using natural language processing to generate queries. That's changing behaviors. It's changing how the performance acts. How do you monitor all that? How do you manage that? How big a deal is that?
It's a massive deal, and we're hearing about it constantly. That the deployment of AI across organizations is happening. It's a faster change than really anything that we've ever seen before. It's so dramatically changed the daily behavior of almost the entire organization all at once, and with that, people are creating the little pockets. They're using things like ChatGPT and Claude, even whether or not their companies wants them to or not. And that's going to happen, and we will kind of put some governance around that. But what's really interesting is that they want to access all of this data that's available to them inside their organization, but large language models are famously not very good at creating like really efficient SQL. They're very good at just creating something that's going to work.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that that it's come up with it in a really
efficient.
Yeah, a really succinct way that's going to like be best for that particular platform. And so the way that you have tuned databases in the past, like or tuned the warehouses in the past, has been to look for consistent queries and look for consistent usage on how certain things are going to be done, and therefore either create dashboards that people are interacting with, or try and get everybody using a certain query pattern that's the same, or create different data sets that are materialized so you're serving it in a better way. With AI, you're now going to have a scenario where everyone is just banging on the data warehouse all at once, with like whatever just came to their mind. If everyone at this point has used ChatGPT and Claude and kind of all of these experiences, and you just like, you ask it a question, it comes back, and you're like, oh, well, not that, or oh, can you give it to me in a slightly different way?
Right.
And it just, it's great that people can be really self-service, and hopefully they're asking questions in the right way to get the right answer to make a data-driven decision. But in the meantime, these databases are just like getting slammed. Slammed in a way that they've never been before. And so a lot of times you find that databases are like, wait, we're really good at being fast as long as your queries are very simple, and they're very consistent, and you can control the concurrency. When it's just an explosion of SQL that just works, but is not like thinking about the performance on the other end, like the efficiency on the other end, those things fall over very quickly, or become so expensive that it becomes untenable. And so we have been seeing a lot of people reviewing, well, like what this great thing that's happening in the AI space, what is that going to do to my budgets? And so I think it's a fascinating space. We at Yellowbrick I kind of feel like we have kind of lucked out. In that our tool, we certainly will claim to be the fastest in whatever metrics, and being just fast isn't particularly special. But what we're particularly good at is really complex queries across huge amounts of data, and still returning in sub-second, and still being 3 to 5 times faster than most. 3 to 5 times less costly than most of the platforms out there.
Well, and those costs add up, and basically, I joked earlier today, someone told me about 7-8 years ago, the most unpredictable line item on your budget now is your AWS bill.
Absolutely.
And now we're seeing it through this LLM connected to SQL, because you may not know the complexity of the queries going in. It's going to send your system sideways, so you have to be able to monitor that. You have to have some observability into that, and some governance around that.
Totally.
And how do you govern that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we're at an AI conference, and everyone is very excited about the possibility of AI. But when the rubber meets the road, we do have to think about, like, we do not have infinite budget, and we do need a lot of governance around this, and we do have to think to ourselves, well, AI is not going to be a panacea. We actually have to think through, like, what is going to be the architecture in the future.
Well, and you made a really good point, and what I've noticed with AI is that it's very good at first drafts. It's very good at sort of templates or giving you a high-level view of something. But if you're writing code, for example, you don't want to just, first of all, you don't want to connect it to your Git repository, right? And, and I hear people doing this, I'm like, guys, do not do that, because it's generative. And so, there are context window issues, but it just makes stuff up. It just decides to do things, and you're like, well, why did you dump the database? There was a story the other day. So it's like, governance means so much. There's a lot that goes into governance. It's policy, it's data sovereignty. For example, that's a real big issue these days. Where is the data? Where is the processing? You have to have policies around this and be able to address that, right?
Oh, absolutely. I went to the Australian Government Data Summit in Canberra a few months ago, and so I got to talk to a lot of people who are have operations that are related to just like data. Well, data sovereignty was just like the number one thing that came up. There are so many things where if the answer is, well, we're going to host your data, it's already no.
No.
It's just that's fine if it's just like some it's just a small little company and their data may or may not be that consequential. But if it's a bank, if it's an insurance company, or God help you, if it's a government, they are extremely sensitive to not just say the data has to be hosted in my country, but you have to be able to say, like, sovereignty means that we fully understand the entire chain of custody, all the way through. So if there's somebody in the wrong jurisdiction who has the keys to ultimately get to your data, that means you don't have data sovereignty. And if you are using a hosted AI platform, that and that AI platform has access to your data, well then you also don't have data sovereignty. So you really do need to have an incredible amount of control to be able to honestly say, we know every single step in which this data ever gets moved around. No one ever touches it that is not exactly supposed to be able to touch it. It's an interesting space.
It kind of plays into another theme here, which is repatriation. And we're seeing this from, I already talked to 2 guests today who threw out repatriation, and I like to joke, old Mark Twain, I paraphrase him when I say that the rumors of on-prem's demise have been greatly exaggerated. It's still there, and we're coming up with new ways to use it for PII, for intellectual property, for training your models, and for small language models, which I think don't get enough attention these days, because that's a way to get power in your environment that you control. So you tackle governance, you tackle cost, you tackle sovereignty, like all those things. Guess what? On-prem, hello.
Totally. I've actually been shocked at how much at this conference we have talked to a lot of people that are just like, that have way more on-prem than I expect. And a lot of times you hear on-prem, but we're moving to cloud. And I really haven't heard that. I've heard a lot of people that are like, we run a hybrid scenario. I've heard some people that are all cloud already, but they're like, and when you press them on it, they're like, yes, we're all cloud. Yes, we're on one of the big data warehousing platforms of some sort. And yes, my strategy is effectively, I throw money at that. But I've seen a big push right now, or more representation of on-prem, and consideration around control than I expected.
Well, and our break is coming up here. Podcast bonus segment is up next, folks. But you hit a couple really key points here, and we'll discuss this in the podcast bonus. And it's like, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And I think a lot of times, and this happens all the time, people get all excited about some new wave of technology or of innovation like Hadoop. We talked about Hadoop. It's very interesting. We learned a lot in the Hadoop years, even though Hadoop is not really mainstream anymore for a whole variety of reasons. Like my last guest said, S3 killed Hadoop. And it did. It's like, it solved, like, that was a real risk for that whole architecture. And it was hard. It was Byzantine. It was a very difficult thing to do properly. And now you have Iceberg, and we'll talk about that too. And open table formats, and it's like, okay, that allows me to theoretically bridge the gap of all sorts of different environments, and that's valuable, but also it can be slow, it can take longer.
Completely.
So you really have to understand, what is the purpose of our solution, who are we serving, how can we do that best? These are the questions that need to go into decisions made about these technologies. Podcast bonus segment is coming up, we'll be right back. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, podcast bonus segment with Tim Alexander of Yellowbrick Data. And we're talking about Iceberg. I had to sit there and do some research a few weeks ago to say, all right, so you got these manifests and you've got the JSON and all this stuff, and you're basically putting an overlay on this block storage to be able to understand what's in there and run queries, right? So you're kind of extending the analytic environment to include external sources, which is great, but you have to know when to do that, as opposed to when you want to pull something into your warehouse, for example. I mean, federated queries, like there are companies like Dremio, there are companies like, there's like Trino, there are all these different ways you can do this stuff, but what makes sense for your organization, and it really pays to know when you can solve a problem without going that route, right? But what are your thoughts about open table formats and how it's changing things?
We are constantly talking about that topic at Yellowbrick right now, and we're very interested in Iceberg. It feels like out of the various open table formats. Iceberg feels like it has a lot of the momentum.
Right.
We're very much paying attention to what's going on there. We definitely have that experience of it is slow.
Right.
And so, and every implementation that we've seen of it has been far slower than than would be acceptable to the Yellowbrick customers. Right. Like, like Yellowbrick is very specifically focused on being able to be unbelievably fast.
Right.
Especially when you have complex scenarios.
Right.
And so we are actually looking right now into what would it mean to have Yellowbrick working with Iceberg as well as our own proprietary format, but we don't want to do like a Me Too integration.
Interesting.
We want to make sure that if we're going to head down the open data formats, that we are doing it in a way that's very intentional and is very much thinking about the performance side of it for the Yellowbrick customers.
I see.
Yeah. So we're watching from the side and we're kind of like dipping our toe into the water right now.
Right.
But we really need to be extremely intentional about what we do there.
Well, and patience runs thin, right? I mean, that's the bottom line, especially once you get fast access, like to go back to slow. I saw a meme once that cracked me up. It was a meme that basically said, if you just started dating someone, put them on a machine with a very slow internet connection to see who you're really dealing with. And it was just so dark, because it's like, people don't want to wait for things, and once you get it fast, you like, it disrupts your thought process if it takes too long. I mean, that's the deal, right? So once you get used to it, and this is my point about solution architecture, when does it make sense to leverage an open table environment? When does it make sense to just bring something into your environment? And these are decisions made ad hoc based upon all kind of factors. The use case, the data availability, the speed, the business users, all these things come into play, and that's the job of the solution architect, right?
I agree. Yeah, I think that the open data format movement that's happening right now is a good one, a very worthy one, and we're happy it's happening. It makes sense, but I do think that it's still in the process of baking right now, and I think that it's very much something where we want to we don't want to compromise on the value that we deliver,
right?
And so we just want to we will figure that out for the Yellowbrick approach.
Right.
For it. Yeah.
Well, and then just kind of wrap it up here. Cost structures. I mean, it's so easy to go down a path that you think is going to work out well, and then the costs just explode.
Yeah.
This gets it back again, and there are lots of ways that you can optimize these things, but it really pays to understand what are your options, what's the architecture that makes the most sense for this business case or that business case, and think through these things. Even use ChatGPT to ask for ideas.
Seriously.
Hey, this is our environment, this is what we're using, is there a way to do this better?
Yeah.
You'd be surprised, you get some really good answers.
You really, I completely agree. I think that there's oftentimes a feeling of inertia, especially if the company has decided we're going to go with Snowflake or we're going to go with Databricks, something like that. Then the idea is, okay, we just now move everything over to those two platforms, and the strategy is, we have one thing and we don't have all of these separate tools.
Right.
That's fine, but generally when you're buying software, there's either the all-in-one play or there's the best-in-class play.
Right.
And usually the all-in-one players are very good at one thing. That's how they got their hand, their start. Right. And then they went to the all-in-one. You're compromising a lot on the rest of what they're offering.
Right.
So we have a lot of customers right now who are actually using Yellowbrick and Snowflake, or Yellowbrick and Databricks together, and saying, okay, well, we have a strategy here that is the way to deliver, say, analytics to our larger organization. That might be through Snowflake, but the heavy loads that are constantly running, they're doing that in Yellowbrick,
right? Because
they don't want to pay absurd amounts of money,
right?
And absurd amounts of egress fees. I mean, the whole thing is just crazy. If you know that you have these loads that are constantly happening,
right?
Why would you want to pay like 5 times more.
I remember the egress. I remember thinking of an analogy to Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave.
Yeah, it's
right? It's
wild.
like you just get hammered by these things, and then you're hog-tied. And this gets back to the concept of lock-in and the whole concept of agility. And for me, going forward, especially with AI, you want to experiment. You want to play around. You want to let your people pull strings and turn knobs and do things to ideate. ChatGPT can help you with that, but then once you know what you want to do, you have to build it the old-fashioned way, right? So it really pays to understand, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Right. There are proven strategies, architectures for delivering value at a good price point and value that gets business users what they want. Yeah. And that's all about, all these things come together. Governance, cost, sovereignty, experimentation, all these things come together. If you do it right, you're off to the races, right? Yeah, couldn't agree more. We there are so many scenarios where the incumbents that for companies that we're talking to, whether it be prospects or current customers who are in different departments that aren't using Yellowbrick, they'll say that their strategy for managing the costs when they're trying to experiment is just to use those tools less. And that not
sucks.
Really a strategy. It's not really a strategy.
So we're definitely. I think people are opening up to that a little bit, and so it's been very well received to kind of be able to say, hey, imagine if you can continue doing exactly what you're doing. Right. Keep getting the benefits of the unbelievably great platforms that they are. Right. But in those scenarios, be able to pull back and say, I don't need to spend like huge amounts of my budget just on something that I know is predictable and I know is just sitting there having to process. Why do we have to do it in the most expensive way possible? Right. And I'll close with a quote from Deion Sanders. So I attended the Boomi conference last year, and he was on stage being interviewed by Steve Lucas, and it came to Q&A time, and I was just like this, and it was great because he looked right at me and goes, yes, sir, and he points at me, I'm like, all right, and I asked him a question, and he gave me some advice. It's really interesting advice. He said, focus on the main thing. That's what he said, focus on the main thing. Don't get distracted with other things. If you know what you're trying to do, focus on that, get it done. Folks, look this gentleman up online, Tim Alexander, Yellowbrick Data. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you later. Send me an email if you want to be on the show, info@insideanalysis.com. We'll talk to you next time. You've been listening to Inside Analysis. Thanks, Eric. Thank you.